Hey there. I am excited to come on for just a bit. We had a wonderful sports talk with Felix and Kamal this morning, and it was a special edition commemorating Juneteenth and Father's Day. And boy, oh boy, do I have a recipe for you. You know, I often do post about speaking of food because I am a foodie. This is mm-mm-mm. Not the recipe that I have for you, but click share so that I can share the recipe that I do have for you. These are some eggs, some scrambled eggs, and those are probably not almost menus for Juneteenth. Neither is, probably most of you would say, in the big debate of does sugar go in grits? That's a big debate, you know. I say yes and no. I don't put sugar itself, but I do put grape jelly, salt, and pepper and butter in my grits. So I'm hoping that if that's you and that's something that you do, that you understand and you will share this with somebody else. It's Juneteenth, and I wanted to share a recipe that I thought of would be great for Juneteenth. Now, I'm sure that many people uh, are learning more these days about Juneteenth, especially since the U.S. has now officially recognized Juneteenth. President Joe Biden has signed a bill that was passed, I think, unanimously by the Senate and minor Republican dissent in the House on June 15th and 16th, respectively, that makes a federal holiday out of Juneteenth. And so there's been a lot of chatter about, what does that really mean, and why is that important, if at all? In case you don't know, Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration, of the ending of slavery in the United States. From its Galveston, Texas origination in 1865, the observance of Juneteenth, or June 19th, as the African American Emancipation Day, has spread across the United States and beyond. And so today it commemorates African American freedom, and it emphasizes education and achievement. It is a day, a week, and in some areas a month that is marked with celebration, guest speakers, picnics, and family gatherings. It's a time for reflection and rejoicing. It's a time for assessment, self-improvement, and for planning for the future. Its growing popularity signifies a level of maturity and dignity in America that is long overdue. In cities across the country, people of all races, nationalities, and religions are joining hands to truthfully acknowledge a period in our history that shapes and continues to influence our society today. Sensitized to the conditions and experiences of others, only then can we make significant and lasting improvements in our society, as says Juneteenth.com. I want to share that, where that originates. And the general order number 3 was one of General Granger's first orders of business, was to read to the people of Texas this general order, which kind of begins with: the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former slave masters and slaves, and the connection here to or existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor, which is the caveat that I hope we have some good discussion about as the time goes on. And so that's why people are celebrating Juneteenth to some degree, and some people say, what is there to celebrate? Well, it is the sense for some that all were free at that point, not just some were free, all were free and recognized. But were they really free? As you heard me read, the new relationship was no longer master and slave owner, it was employer and hired laborer. It wasn't equal and equal. And So free but not equal, is that really free? What is in the question? But getting back to speaking of food, because I am going to get back to that recipe, I know that there are people that don't believe that sugar goes in grits, and I don't put sugar directly in the grits. I put grape jelly, grape jelly, camphor jelly. You put that in my grits. I put a little bit of pepper and salt. So people say, how in the world would you be putting pepper and salt in grits? And there's already some butter in there. Okay, already some butter in there. Now, this is not the recipe that I want you to know, but I want to talk to you about before we get into that recipe, which I promise you to shortly. Just some of the things that might be on a Juneteenth celebration. This would be a mine. My Juneteenth celebration would have jelly, salt, butter, pepper in my grits. Okay? I'm mixing them up. And as you should be able to see, mm, 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 my favorite, favorite. Also, on that menu today, some people might have barbecue or beef brisket. And I'm not a favor, or I am not, I don't really care for vinegary based barbecue sauce or vinegary based meat necessarily. My dad used to make a mean venison, but that's another story. But I do think it would be something that would be on the table for a beef brisket. My dad would tell me often, because I didn't eat this, you sure you black? I did not eat watermelon. As a matter of fact, I started eating honeydew in my 20s, cantaloupe in my 30s. I just last year had some watermelon that I didn't think was nasty. It was yellow watermelon and it was sweet. These are all things that I think might be on the table. And just before I get to that Juneteenth recipe that I think is important that you will want to have, I hope that you can take a moment to click share just so that others will have access to this uh, special feature for Love and Stuff. It is speaking of food. And speaking of food, I am a foodie and I absolutely love food. So speaking of that, or kind of before we get to that, I wanted to share a couple of things about Juneteenth and this interesting contrast of Juneteenth and the Fourth. And you may be familiar with Frederick Douglass's writings about the 4th of July. And I want to just read an excerpt of this to you, what to the slave is the 4th of July. As you think about what to the free is Juneteenth, I want you to think about this reading and see if it sparks anything. So a few excerpts. By the river of Babylon, rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there, they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they who wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of those songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. I'm going to go down to another part. For the present, Frederick Douglass writes in what is the 4th of July to the slave. It is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and cycling, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans dividing and subdividing a discourse to show that men have a natural right to freedom? Speaking of it relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively, to do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them in obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought that which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? They that can may. I cannot. The time for such argument is past. And that's from Frederick Douglass's speech, What is the Fourth to the Slave? So I'm asking you, what is Juneteenth to the free? If we be free, what is it? I'm speaking of food today. And speaking of food, I determined unanimously of my own vote that jelly, grape jelly in particular, with salt, pepper, and butter goes into grits. That's my mixture of what's going to be on my Juneteenth table, what is on it right now. Grits that have butter, salt and pepper, and jelly. But just before I give you the recipe, not that recipe, but before I give you the recipe, it's one thing you are going to do Now the waiting at the list. Get your pen and paper for this recipe. You are, I'm telling you, you're going to be so happy of this recipe. As a matter of fact, I'm going to mix the recipe in my bowl. Okay? You ready to get the pen and paper? Here's the first ingredient. First ingredient. I don't want to know what I'm cooking today. Absolutely nothing. But this recipe. Here's the first ingredient. Can you see that? This is the first ingredient that I'm putting in my recipe bowl that I'm going to stir up. It's amalgamate the humus. Amalgamate the humus. What do I mean by that? The word almost of the day is intersectionality. That there are so many different layers or scales as it relates to our diverse existence on this planet in this earth school. That Black is not just Black, but it's Black women. It's Black men. It is gender expression women and or men that are Black. There are so many intersectionalities. But before we really have a recipe for Juneteenth, our base has to be to combine all of these things, of the things that we are together. Who are we? What is the humus? Amalgamate, combine the humus that we have the singularity of commonality. No, we're not all women. No, we're not all men. No, we're not all LGBTQIA plus. No, we're not all Pentecostals. No, we're not all Methodists. No, we're not all Baptists. No, we're not all middle class. No, we're not all upper class. No, we're not all in poverty. No, we're not all bachelor degrees. No, we're not all master degrees. No, we're not all doctorate degrees or letters. No, we're not all high school GED. No, we don't all live in the suburbs. No, we don't all live in the city. But we have a humus that has to be amalgamated for the purposes of getting the power out of Juneteenth and bringing it forward into our everyday lives. For your base, I submit, you need to amalgamate the who-ness. We are good with saying what separates us, what makes us different, why we aren't the Muslim, why we aren't Baptist, why we aren't Bethlehem Israelite, why we aren't, you follow? Why we shouldn't necessarily associate with them. But we must get to a unity, a oneness of who we are. No, we're not all of those things, but of those things, we are all Black. We are all African American. We all are descendants of great people who were enslaved. And we must unite for that purpose. So I'm stirring that up. And we got to stir that up real good. Because if we don't get that base right, we will never have the dish that we need to have. We will never have the Juneteenth that we need to have. The second thing I say that people often say is not the second thing, but I say it is the second ingredient. It is, we need to organize. Yes, we have the NAACP. God, thank God for the NAACP. Thank God for the Open League. But in mass, we are not organized. We need to organize because we have a common humus. And once we understand that if those folks in Galveston, Texas hadn't been notified of their freedom, we all weren't truly free. And if we all aren't living out the purposes of that freedom, that all men are created equal, we don't have truths to hold self-evident, but we must self-evident, we must amalgamate in our base and organize. We need organize. The next thing I say, once we organize, we have to strategize. And I believe there's an economically strategize. We have to bring our resources together and plan what we want to do, what we have the resources to do, what resources we need, and how we're going to go about getting them. Okay? So we got a plan. After we organize, people say, well, you should plan first. Let's organize first so that people will not go off into these factions about what the strategy looks like. Let's do the organize of the things that we have in common first, and then strategize. And today's strategy could be as simple as just buying Black. We decided that we were going to withhold anything today on Juneteenth that did not go into Black communities, Black businesses, Black people. What a powerful statement we would make. And while big conglomerates like Procter & Gamble have done a lot to widen the view, let's make them widen the pockets. We must strategize, and there's an economic component to it. Then I say we mobilize. And the mobilize is not organizing for the sake of being organized. It's organizing in a faction now that the strategy has been given. We are getting get your mark, get set. We're on the get set so that we get prepared to move out in an orderly fashion, in a strategic fashion, with marching orders after we've mobilized, after we've organized rather, and after we've strategized. Now we can mobilize our efforts, our intentions, our teams, our groups to accomplish what the strategy says. You must add mobilize. It won't rise if you don't mobilize. Stirring that mobilize good. And when you think you've stirred it, as my mom would say, you got to really stir it. And lastly, you got to vote. And vote means your voice is engaged in the process to me. It does mean going to the ballot box at the appointed time, but it also means attending your community meetings where you have a voice to vote, where you have a voice to say, no, we don't want that kind of business in our neighborhood. Your presence and your voice must be heard more than midterm and general election, more than the mayoral election and city councils and boroughs in your cities and towns and villages and counties and townships. You have to be present with your voice on a regular, active basis. And that is what I'm calling vote. You mix all those up. Now, you don't have to worry about the heat, because the heat will be turned up once you start mixing these things up. You better believe me, the oven will be hot. And the more you mix this up and the more noise it makes, the hotter that oven's going to get. The heat only causes the mobilized to rise higher. It only causes the who-ness to deepen its roots until you're ready to lay your batter and your demands to rise. What? No, that's not the end of the recipe. You have to rinse and repeat, and you have to teach others how to do this very thing. So, Simone, my glorious creation is actually ingredients for Juneteenth. It's a Juneteenth recipe for us to amalgamate the who-ness, for us to organize on the things we have in common, for us to strategize around economics and power, for us to mobilize after we have organized and gotten our strategic plan, and to use our voice not just in the formal process, but in every process to vote. Mix those up, stir those, and to stir those, the heat is going to happen. It's going to be turned up anytime that you mobilize, organize, strategize. And you will have something that will rise out of Juneteenth with momentum to make the change that we keep saying we want to see. We keep saying we want to see reparations. We keep saying we want to see restorative justice. But the very ingredients that we have access to, we won't utilize. It's unfair to tell people not to celebrate Juneteenth when we don't formalize a plan to move beyond it. It is a wonderful start. It is not a be-all or cure-all, some special vaccine for racism. It's not. But it's going in the right direction if we take ingredients seriously to build upon it. I just wanted to come and wish you a very happy Juneteenth. And I hope that this recipe is one that you find easy to make, easy enough that you can start conversations in your area. Who are the people talking about reparations in your area? Who are the people that are like-minded in your area? And who are the people that are different? And how can you just have a conversation around amalgamating the who-ness, combining the who-ness of who we are? Meaning, maybe you don't espouse the lifestyle of the LGBTQIA+. But what is the commonality that you have with them, that you are both African American? Maybe you don't believe in women in leadership in the church and other organizations. And maybe it's time to have a dialogue with a woman in leadership so you get the other side of the coin, if you will, and see what you have in common. Amalgamate the who-ness in conversations, and then begin to organize around the things you have in common. There is so much strength and power in unity, but it's virtually untapped because we are inside of our own factions and we have lulled ourselves into a picnic that is as far from freedom as those folks in Galveston were awaiting theirs. I'm Marcus Holmes, and if you like this content, I hope that you will click share and tag someone and have a discussion about the content. Happy Juneteenth to you, and thank you for being here. Don't forget to click the bell if you are on Facebook to follow us, or if you're on LinkedIn, reminded so that you will certainly be notified of future events that are to come. And I see Simon Morris is just like a food recipes. There are different qualities of ingredients and different flavor combinations you can create. And due to everyone's delight and wonder and bring people together around the dinner table and, around the world. Yes, I'm so glad that I could bring you some information about Juneteenth, being an Aussie that lives in France. I hope you will learn more. And as I prepare to close, I am going to read a prayer for Juneteenth that comes from Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. And then hopefully I will be able to play, I'm hoping to play these clips. I think I have this clip available to play for you. I was not able to stay for the entire event. Yeah, I think I do have these clips to play for you, but I just have two short clips that I'll play for you. Here in Detroit, Michigan, a portion of the Northwest Outer Drive Street is being renamed Marvin Gaye Drive. And as you know, Marvin Gaye was a famous singer from the Motown era, one of my singing idols. And I was honored to be able to just stand near. It was raining, so a lot of people dispersed, but to stand near, so you may not be able to crystal clear hear what's going on, but a letter is read from a member of his family that could not attend, and a member of his family who was in attendance speaks during that time before they unveiled the signs. And so I did not stay for the entire thing because, again, it was raining, kind of pouring down there for a bit, and everybody was trying to take cover. So I didn't see the unveiling of the signs, but I'll be sure to take a picture of that and share that with you. I'll read this prayer and then we'll go to those two clips, and I will bid you a happy Juneteenth and a grateful, grateful day. Almighty God, we praise your name, for you alone are God. There is none like you, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, full of love, truth, and justice. You care for the orphans and widows and look upon the immigrant with affection. Your love is not threatened by the ways we diminish, marginalize, and destroy each other. There is none like you. You have made your faithfulness known from generation to generation, and you declare it better to do justice than to make sacrifice. Throughout the biblical story, we hear again and again how you have continued to rescue your people, releasing us from bondage so that we might live fully and freely as your children. We remember Moses and the Exodus. We remember the cycles of deliverance and repentance under the judges. We remember the prophets and the returns from exile. And we remember where you declared in Isaiah 10, woe unto those who legislate people, robbing the poor and making women and children their prey. We remember how you have in all of these things made known your generous love for the least of these. We recall most of all how you entered this story in the flesh, releasing us from our sins through Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection. You reconciled us with yourself, and in doing so, you taught us to be reconciled with one another. Through the Holy Spirit, you continue to tear down the dividing walls of hostility and inequality that separate us from each other and distort your gospel. We add our voices to the generations that have gone before us in giving thanks for the freedom you brought in the United States when legal slavery ended. Over 200 years of European Americans shipping and trading African peoples as if they were disposable goods distorted our experience of your image, both in those enslaved and in those who enslaved others. Yet you have a history of overcoming our most dehumanizing abuses of each other even when we normalize our abuses through words of law and government sanctioned violence. Thank you for raising up faithful servants who declare and fight for abolition of injustice. Thank you for not abandoning our foreparents. Thank you for releasing us from the legalized injustices we have suffered. Thank you for your mercy and compassion, Lord. Remind us that we must remember and can never retreat. While we have made slavery illegal, too much of society continues to participate in systems, structures, and cultural patterns that diminish, distort, and destroy the lives of persons of color. Too many are still too enslaved to racism, to the goals of voter separation, to efforts to blocking living wages and health care. By your spirit, free us, set us free. Use our remembrance to cause us to never retreat from working to see this nation and world released from the deceptive corruption that is in the hearts and patterns and practices that continue to be passed along from generation to generation. In remembering the day in which the slaves in Texas finally heard of their emancipation, we still cry out to you and are open to be used by you to end all slavery, racism, voter suppression, greed, hate, violence, poverty, denial of health care, environmental injustice, war, and the false religion of white supremacy and white nationalism. Lord, when we get tired, free us from apathy and inaction. Open our eyes. Search us, O Lord, and call us into action to bring an end to the injustices that are contrary to your way. Help us to never leave undone the weightier matters of law, justice, faithfulness, and love. May you make us into one people. Grant us the strength in your name to spend ourselves on behalf of those who are still entangled in slavery, so that together we might experience the full reconciliation and new life that you desire for all people. We offer this prayer that your glory and honor might be made known through the freedom of all people. Amen. I want you to share these over at the Garden Day tribute. And that was a piece of the letter written by Zeola Gay, the sister of Marvin Gaye. A thank you, though she wasn't able to be present, for the unveiling of the street name renamed at Monica, I believe, and Outer Drive in Northwest Detroit will now be Marvin Gaye Drive. And this closing Video is also from another member of the family, just a small snippet. Yeah, that's what I'm about to do too. You too. And that closes our show. That was a snippet of one of Marvin Gaye's sons who was giving tribute to his dad. And I hope in the spirit of Black Music Month, Juneteenth, and Father's Day weekend, that you will do something to add to this great ingredient that we said throughout the show. Join us as we close out the weekend tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time with a tribute to fathers. Many of those in and around the Love and Stuff community have made video tributes to their fathers living and passed on, and we will share those videos to you, with you rather, and a few short uh, moments of reflection of my own dad tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock p.m. So whether you are watching live via restream rather on LinkedIn, on Facebook on the Marcus R. Holmes page or the Love and Stuff community page, on Twitch TV or YouTube events or IG Live, join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for being here.